Welcome to the Three Martini Lunch. Grab a stool next to Greg Columbus of Radio America and Jim Garrity of National Review. Three Martinis coming up.
And so glad you're with us for the Friday edition of the Three Martini Lunch, our usual smattering of martinis. We'll get a little bit of draft analysis in at the end. So we've got good, definitely bad, and definitely crazy martinis. The good, it's a little tabloidy, but it's also illustrative of the problem that this president has had from the very beginning. Okay, one of the problems that this president has had from the very beginning, and that is not choosing the people around him based on ability. But the New York Post with this story, and it's by Stephen Nelson, who never gets called on in the White House briefing room, and now he's really not going to get called on in the White House briefing room. The title is Inside the Failed White House Coup to Oust Biden Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre, who has been on the job now longer than Jen Psaki was, and she's not good. She's not any better than she used to be, which was not good to begin with. She basically reads straight out of the briefing book, and that is why some people wanted her gone. And the de facto White House communications chief, Anita Dunn, who you might remember from the Obama administration because she considered Mao Zedong one of her greatest inspirations, as I recall. I think it was Mother Teresa and Mao.
Greg, she was also the woman behind Attack Watch, in which you were encouraged to report citizens who you saw unfairly criticizing the president to Attack Watch! Report your neighbors! Attack Watch! Sorry,
we had a lot of fun with that. So anyway, basically the idea here was that Anita Dunn came in and she wanted to convince Karine Jean-Pierre to leave, to go on to something else. And there was even an offer for her to head up Emily's List, the big pro-abortion organization that gets involved with politics. But Karine Jean-Pierre says, no, I'm dedicated to this president through the 2024 election. And so everybody's like, thanks for your dedication, KJP, because they know she stinks and they didn't want her at the job anymore, but they can't get rid of her. They can't get rid of her because she checks all the demographic diversity boxes. She's black, she's gay, she's an immigrant, and she's a woman, obviously. And so, Jim, they're stuck with her. They hired her for reasons that now prohibit them from getting rid of her. How delicious.
It is indeed a fun, gossipy story. By the way, if you are somewhere on the board or you work for or otherwise a supporter of Emily's List, how do you feel about hearing that, look, she's really bad at this. She's a terrible communicator. We got to get, where can we put her where she won't do any damage? What can we do? Where can we stick her where no one will notice and it won't have any negative consequence? Emily's List. Anybody can run Emily's List. That's fine. The place runs itself. I find this, in addition to be, the delightful gossip sense. We talked about this with Dana Perino, one of our rare guests a little while ago. Karine Jean-Pierre strikes me as really terrible at this job. And I think Dana Perino gave her a very, having been in that job, could kind of give the assessment of look, Karine Jean-Pierre is not put into the best situation. It clearly sounds like she does not have a close, long-time working relationship with the president, which is a major advantage for a White House press secretary. But she's bad at it. And it's kind of nice to see that Anita Dunn sees the same things we do. And that she is much more ideologically inclined to agree with the sorts of things Karine Jean-Pierre says, but she just doesn't say it well. She doesn't seem prepared. She doesn't give clear answers. It's transparent spin that's not all that plausible. She's just, she's lousy at it. And I think it's kind of revealing that the same dynamic we hear in this discussion of Karine Jean-Pierre. She's really lousy at the job. She hasn't grown into the job. We had high hopes. We thought there was potential there, but it just hasn't developed. Hey, guess what? We're getting into our draft analysis early in this podcast. Because that's what you hear about, Zach Wilson or a whole bunch of other players. They just didn't turn out the way you're hoping, based on potential. I also feel like a lot of what we're hearing in this discussion applies to Vice President Kamala Harris. That, going back to 2019, Biden himself was talking about being a bridge. And there was this expectation that Biden might serve just one term, pass the torch to a younger, healthier, more diverse Democrat, and that would, be the Democrats' path forward. Hasn't happened. And, for the last 3.5 years, we've seen two types of profiles written about Kamala Harris. Kamala Harris has turned the corner. How she got her groove back. Things are going great. And then 2 months later, why things are still going wrong for Kamala Harris. And, lo and behold, this expected renaissance, this expected glory days never quite comes to pass. And look, I don't want to be seen as picking on these people, but just kind of this observation, like, okay, both of them were picked. The fact that they are African-American women seems like a likely factor in that. The Democrats did not want to be the party of old white men. They're in this position, picked on potential. That potential did not develop, and they have no way of getting rid of them. Because if you say to the person, you're just not getting it done, you got to go, the counter-accusation will be that you're racist and sexist. And this is a problem for the Democrats that is likely to outlast the Biden presidency. If you operate, I don't know whether you want to characterize this as wokeism. I don't know if you want to characterize this as part of the DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion mindset. This idea that if you pick, first of all, you're supposed to pick someone based on the color of their skin and on their gender. And then once they're in there, you can't take them out until they're ready to go. You cannot say, you haven't done the job well. You've botched it. I'm sorry. This is just not working out, which happens for everybody else in every other, employment situation whatsoever. Right? If this podcast stinks, Radio America is going to say, we're not going to do this anymore. We're not going to be able to say, well, this is an offensive move against the Irish American and Greek American communities. The bosses will just laugh at that. That's the same thing at every other place. And this idea that, no, because of these factors, this is a real problem for Democrats. That this is, I'm not saying that everybody who's a minority is incompetent. Clearly, there are plenty of minorities who are qualified. But when you pick someone based on that, and all of a sudden you're judging them by a different standard, often a lower standard, you end up with problems like this. And now Biden has got two problems in this sort of thing. And, vice president and press secretary, two kind of important roles for how you're going to communicate to the American people here. So Biden's 0 for 2. And of course, he just goes like, they're just going to have to, weather the storm. They're just going to have to keep going with these two because they dare not say, they're not even, look, when she's not even willing to take an illustrious job like Emily's List, then she's committed and just doesn't want to leave.
Yes.
Or, should be committed and doesn't want to leave.
If you're going to send anyone to Emily's List, it should be somebody grossly incompetent, because I would love to see them fall flat on their face in the next elections. But the fact they had to bring in John Kirby should have been the biggest clue that she was not up to the job. And honestly, I don't even think Biden pays attention to the briefings. I would be very surprised if he's getting any sort of updates on how badly she's doing from the podium.
Greg, you could have stopped that sentence after attention. I don't think Biden pays attention, period.
No.
Briefings, statements put out under his name, briefings to keep an airbase open in Afghanistan. Or he pays attention. He just doesn't remember.
All right. Z-Biotics. If you're fed up with what you're seeing from the Biden administration, it's not a big surprise if you want to have a stiff drink once in a while. But if you're going to do that, make sure your next morning is not rough. And so to do that, you want to take Z-Biotics. It's the pre-alcohol probiotic drink, and it's the world's first genetically engineered probiotic.
Greg, I could have used this one of the past couple nights in Kansas City. But I will not disclose which one. You'll just have to watch the episodes and see which one does Jim look a little slower than usual. Here's how it works. When you drink, alcohol gets converted into a toxic byproduct in the gut. And it's this byproduct, not dehydration, that's to blame for your rough next day. Z-Biotics produces an enzyme that breaks this byproduct down. So just remember to make Z-Biotics your first drink of the night, drink responsibly, and you'll feel your best the next day.
Just go to zbiotics.com/3ml to get 15% off your first order when you use 3ml at checkout. Z-Biotics is backed with 100% money-back guarantees, so if you're unsatisfied for any reason, they will refund your money, no questions asked. Visit zbiotics.com/3ml and use the code 3ml at checkout for 15% off. Thank you, Z-Biotics, for sponsoring this episode and our good times. Well, Jim, it was Jerry Seinfeld, I believe, who specifically said that, was it 95% of the population was undateable? So, and then Elaine asks, how do they get together? Well, alcohol. So that's one thing. But now it seems like people aren't getting together at all because the U.S. fertility rate in this country is at an all-time low. Your colleague James Lynch reporting at National Review, the total fertility rate dropped to 1.62 births per woman last year, a 2% decline from the year before, according to numbers from the Centers for Disease Control. That figure is below replacement level, because you need two parents, right? At 1.62, that's not getting it done, meaning Americans are not having enough children to replace themselves, a development with major implications for the American economy. The total fertility rate is the lowest since the U.S. government began tracking it nearly a century ago, and it reflects a trend visible across the developed world in which women are less inclined to have children because of greater emphasis on career success and access to reproductive technology in predominantly secular societies. There were a little over 3.5 million total births in the U.S. last year, the fewest babies born in the U.S. for any year on record since 1979. And traditionally, Jim, the birth rate kind of trends with the level of optimism in the country. So the Biden years are trending with the Carter years, which could be one interpretation here. But this number has been going down for a while and for a variety of reasons. The story then goes into birth rates. Teen pregnancy, for example, is down, or at least teen births. So hopefully there's not a big spike in abortion, and I don't think there is lately. I think it's just actually down, which is great. But it's also down all the way from that through the age of 39, and then it remains unchanged for women 40 and above. So we've got a problem. It's going to be a huge problem as all these boomers start to retire, and many of them already have. And even Gen X is starting to head into that realm now. And so entitlements are going to be a complete disaster due to our complete inability to show spending restraint in federal government and so many other ways that this is going to be a problem. Western civilization has been dealing with this issue for a long time. Western Europe's even worse than the United States, but apparently we're following that trend, and it's going to lead to a lot of problems.
Greg, this is one of those times where we have a very diverse listenership to this podcast. Some of them are seasoned citizens, but there are some young folks who listen out there. I met a couple of folks out in Kansas City. A couple of folks DM me on Twitter and stuff, and I just want to say to all of them, go for it. Go out, ask that girl out. Ask that guy out. If things are going well, you feel like you match, you feel like, get down on one knee and propose and start having children, because your kid's going to be the greatest thing that ever going to happen to you. They're going to be exhausting. They're going to drive you crazy. They're going to be all kinds of curveballs, and there'll be rough nights. There'll be headaches. There'll be slammed doors. I have two teenagers. Thank you for your prayers. But really, I think you'd say the same thing about your daughters. That like this is the best. This is what makes life worth living. It doesn't surprise me when you'd have a drop in the birth rate. In a couple of years, apparently the colleges are going to run out of students because of the birth rate that dropped during the Great Recession, 2008, 2009, into 2010. It's not surprising that they went down during COVID, although, everybody's stuck at home. There's just a lot of time on your hands to, I might have expected there to be a little bit of that. The fact that we are now in post-COVID life and the birth rate is still exceptionally low really is kind of this big flashing neon sign of trouble. And I think you're right. I think it does point to a lack of optimism, a lack of hope about the future. And there's two schools of thought. The first is that young people and increasingly not so young people just don't want to get married and just don't want to have kids, and that they've kind of embraced this idea of an extended adolescence. The other is that they do want these things, but they can't find that special someone. The relationships don't seem to work out. Look, I realize life sends curveballs your ways, and I think we just got to say, marriage, then kids, it's easier. I'm not going to give you a lot of grief if things don't work out the right way that way. Remember, people thought it was going to be a huge deal, and Palin was picked as McCain's running mate, and her daughter had gotten pregnant before getting married, and the conservatives, I think every conservative was like, look, we don't like seeing it, but once it happens, we want to do what we can to support those young families. And just kind of those other things that, first of all, if you're one of those young guys out there, you've got that special someone, and she's waiting for a ring. First of all, ladies, you know what guys do when they want to get married? They go out and get the ring and they get married. He's not waiting for, they generally don't wait for a special time. I'm sure you can find one or two exceptions out there, but I've had some awkward conversations with female friends where they're like, no, this is totally good. I'm like, if he wanted to do it, he would have done it. He's not waiting for some special moment or, Sagittarius to be rising or something like that. Guys, when guys want to do it, it's generally a matter of, how much can I save up and get the ring? That's my, personal. And the second thing is, guys, you're a special someone. That girlfriend has a ticking clock, ticking biological clock. My younger teenager, Mrs. Garrity, had what is called a geriatric pregnancy. Now, the age that requires to be a geriatric pregnancy is actually quite low, and they measure it by the birth date, not the conception date, so to speak. So she just barely qualified. But you're geriatric pregnancy. Most people are picturing the Golden Girls, right? Geriatric, Let me tell you, she loved being called geriatric. things worked out okay. I talk a bit about this in Heavy Lifting, that for a while, it did not look like things were going to be okay. And that's probably the hardest thing I've ever been through in my life. So time is not always on your side. Things get a little tougher when you decide to have children later in life. I think everybody would tell you it's worth it, but like waiting is not always the right call. Sometimes, and you know, every parent, we get together, you know, we talk about this stuff. There is no perfect time in your life. There is no, if you always say, oh, next year we'll be more financially stable, we'll have more in save. Look, go for it. There is not any magic time where you're going to suddenly feel like, oh, now everything in my life is going perfect and now I feel ready to have children. You're never ready, and it's going to turn out okay. You're going to make mistakes. It's going to turn out fine anyway. Go for it. And I just wish more people in our culture would kind of reinforce that message instead of, there are plenty of Henny Youngman, take my wife, please. You know, people like to complain about their spouses. People like to complain about their kids. I'll do the jokes as much as anybody else. But they're what makes life worth living. And I wonder if some people interpret that, you know, humor, and sometimes dark humor. Look, what's his name? Oh, Louis C.K., rather disgraced. But he has a routine where he talked about putting your kid in the car seat. And then you close the door, and you get that 6-second vacation while you're going around to get back in there. And that's just that 6 seconds of quiet, that 6 seconds of my child is safe, and I could just... And, you know, you can't actually squeeze a nap into those 6 seconds, but you kind of want to. But anyway, like, we get that. It's funny, but none of this says don't have kids. It's not worth it. Even if you're Louis C.K., although that really pushes it.
There will be more expenses. There will be less free time and things like that. But like Jim said, it's totally worth it. Watching your kids discover things they're excited about and having conversations with them as they grow up. The older they get, the more fun they are because you can talk about with them so many different things. They really are some of the greatest blessings that God gives you in life. And you and I are both also very blessed in the spouse department. So
yes, makes it a lot easier.
Yes.
Also, I should point out, you talked about the expense. Really, the day your child no longer needs to wear diapers, it's like the biggest raise you're ever going to get. All of us, oh my God, where does money come from? Right.
No, that's exactly right. So, you know, on a more utilitarian level, our government wants to pay for all this stuff, and we're going to have a ton more retirees very, very soon. And there better be some people paying the bills.
Greg, every time I see one of those op-eds that's like, I'm childless and I'm proud, and, you know, stop shaming me for not having children, and I look down on my parent friends because I have all this free time and all that stuff. I'm part of like, okay, that's fine. You don't get any Social Security, though. You know, like, wait. I've done my part to put enough workers who are going to keep the system going. You haven't done yours, you know, mooch. So anyway.
Yes. And don't forget, you know, a lot of us, you know, as we get older, we have parents who are aging as well. If you don't have children, you better have somebody who's going to be there for you when you're getting older. And that's going to be a significant problem in our country as well. All right. Well, let's talk about something a little bit happier than that. And that is 4 Patriots. Go to 4patriots.com/martini, where you can learn all about the deluxe 3-month survival food kits, which are now back in stock. They were sold out for more than a year. Huge demand, obviously, more than 200,000 Americans agreeing this is survival food that tastes good. But they also spent that time developing even tastier recipes for things like pancakes, mac and cheese, chili, potato soup, spaghetti, lasagna, and more. The bottom line, as always with 4 Patriots, you just want to be prepared. Don't forget about the last chance sale items on the Patriot Pure line with the UV phone sanitizer, UV wand, sanitation solution machine, and the disinfecting power bank. You can stash food away and be confident that when a disaster strikes, you and your family will be ready. Go to 4patriots.com/martini to get the deluxe 3-month survival food kit and the peace of mind you deserve. Plus, get free shipping on orders over $97. That's the number 4patriots.com/martini. That's 4patriots.com/martini. All right, Jim, on to our crazy martini now. And of course, we've talked a lot over the past several days about these unhinged and largely anti-Semitic protests on college campuses around the country, Columbia University being kind of the epicenter of it, but it's spread to a number of different places around the country. And so we've talked about how different campuses have responded to this. Now, of course, it's late April, which means we're very, very close to commencement season at these schools. And with all this upheaval, folks are wondering what's coming next on that front. Well, University of Southern California has now decided that it's going to not have its main stage commencement ceremony after nearly 100 people were arrested on campus during a pro-Palestinian demonstration earlier this week. Now, USC has botched their commencement ceremony about as many different ways as you can botch it. Normally, the valedictorian gives a speech, but this year's valedictorian is a Muslim from South Asia, and the provost decided not to let her give the speech because if she happened to give an anti-Israel speech or whatever it is, that there was going to be a security problem potentially there. So then after the backlash to that decision, they decided no speakers at commencement, and now they're saying no main commencement at all. There will be commencements for the various sections, your area of specialty at USC, but not the big main ceremony. And John Fund, who I think is certainly written for National Review at times, Wall Street Journal guy, voting expert, says this will spread and affect more schools. I don't know if he's going to be right, but I could see it being right as more and more people get skittish about the right way to respond on campus. Jim, this is letting the crazy people win. You've got all these students, the vast majority probably of your students, who buckled down, worked hard for at least 4 years, sometimes more, earn their degree. They deserve that day. Their parents, in many cases who paid for that education, deserve that day. And instead of rewarding them, they're rewarding the crazies, and that's just not right.
Yeah, look, first of all, we didn't talk about this very much, but the story of the valedictorian Asna Tabassum, she apparently had done some social media link to one of those more militant pro-Palestinian, anti-Israel organizations. And this kind of struck me as the sort of thing like that could be resolved with a conversation, which is to say, we'd like you to submit your remarks ahead of time. If you want to talk about what you've learned at USC, hard-learned life lessons, there's probably some things this young woman can say that would be of great value to the entire community. If you prepare your remarks and it's death to Israel, death to the Jew, well, then we have a different story. Then we have to say, okay, that is not appropriate for a commencement address and our messaging. But it just kind of seemed like that this was no, there's just too much risk of you saying something, thus you can't do that. And look, as far as I'm concerned, this woman is no more dangerous than any other USC graduate who won a Heisman Trophy. And but then just in general, the USC leadership is just not covering themselves in glory in any aspect of any of this. And this kind of echoes into what I was writing yesterday in the morning. Like, if you worked hard to become a university president, was it just for the salary? Was it just to have a nice office with a nice view? Don't you want to run your actual... Why are you letting the protesters make the decisions for you and effectively have a veto decision? What's wrong with you saying, no, you know what? We're going ahead with our commencement ceremony. You try to disrupt it, we're going to have the cops there, and we're going to have you arrested. Just like another certain USC grad, because I like going back to that well. This is, if you don't do X, the terrorists win. Well, if you don't do this, then the angry minority gets what they want. Why is USC knuckling under? Why are they surrendering? Why are they giving up? And oh, by the way, the Wall Street Journal had made this very sharp observation. So these kids, who are graduating now, went to USC and got out of high school 4 years ago. What was going on 4 years ago?
COVID.
The COVID pandemic. A whole bunch of these kids had their high school graduations canceled. They had their freshman years being online. Like these kids, God help you, class of 2024. You deserved better than this. I'm really sorry, than all that stuff. I certainly hope this does not catch on. Unfortunately, the mentality at work at so many of these college campuses is leaders who don't want to lead. And people who technically run a university who don't want to run a university and seem petrified of ever telling these protesters something they don't want to hear. I could say grow a pair. I could just say just develop a spine, you wanted this job, do the friggin' job, and show the protesters who's in charge. Do not let your students get punished because you got a bunch of yahoos. And oh, by the way, maybe those yahoos don't belong at your school. Maybe you should be expelling these people. Let's open up some slots because, I just happen to know some folks who are applying, and they didn't apply to USC, but warning for your kids, Greg, there's nothing less special than a moderately brilliant student from Northern Virginia. Apparently they're dime a dozen. Apparently nobody needs them. You'd be much better off if you were from some lesser known part of the country. Pardon my bitterness there. My kids are going to be just fine. The kids I know are going to be just fine. But I look at some of these rejection as like, wait a minute. You're straight A, super on the SATs, because you turned down that kid. But, junior Hamas member, that's the kid you let in? Probably some oil baron's son. Anyway.
Exactly.
Hey, happy Friday, everybody.
So Ben Sass, former senator, who's the president of University of Florida now, I'm sure working with a bunch of other folks there, but they handed out this thing from the Division of Student Life. Here's what you can do when you protest. You can speak, you can express your viewpoints, and you can hold signs in your hands. You can't have amplified sound, no demonstrations inside buildings, no littering, no camping, no sleeping, no unmanned signs, no blocking egresses, no building of structures, no camping, including tents, sleeping bags, etc., no disruptions, no threats, no violence, no weapons, and the consequences, individuals found responsible for engaging in prohibited activities shall be trespassed from the campus. Students will receive a 3-year trespass and suspension, which means you're not coming back, and employees will be trespassed and separated from employment. Boy, good to have some nice leadership there. And USC, you had everything going for you this month. OJ can't embarrass you anymore. Reggie Bush got his Heisman back. Caleb Williams goes #1.
Yes.
All you had to do was hold a commencement. So close. So close. Change that decision. Make it right.
Look, I'm going to tell you, if there's anything we've learned over the last couple of years, it's beware of USC running backs and trust USC quarterbacks, because you look at the successful record of Sam Darnold and the one game he played last year. The only reason I'm giving the Bears any grief for this is that I really wanted Rome Odunze, the wide receiver, and you guys got him one spot ahead of us. I'm fine with Olu Fashanu. He's a perfectly solid Big Penn State offensive tackle. This is the eat your vegetables draft pick. You know, it's always more exciting to get a pass catcher than to get an offensive lineman. He's perfectly good and fine. Just managed to get like 2 extra draft picks for moving back one spot. I'm happy. I'm just a little bit jealous of the Bears, but hey, you guys, if there's anything the Chicago Bears know, it's how to develop quarterbacks. So I'm sure Caleb Williams is in the best of hands.
Never had a 4,000-yard passer, never had a quarterback throw for 30 touchdowns in a season, and as I said,
he could be the first.
He would be. Yeah, can't be the second. We have not had I was talking to Scott Bertram, who's also a Bears fan, on Wednesday. Ever since Sid Luckman was drafted out of Columbia, back when they were normal, in 1938, the only first-round draft pick that's panned out to any extent is Jim McMahon in 1982, who got us a Super Bowl win, but we couldn't keep him healthy, and so that's not good. So I do love Rome Odunze. I'm excited about that. The Bears got who they wanted, so there's no more excuses. I think the front office is stronger than the head coaching there, so let's hope that the coaches can get stuff done. And I was a little bit nervous that we wouldn't get Odunze because he'd been showing up with the Bears quite a bit in the mock drafts. And then Neighbors and Harrison went, and there were a couple other teams to go. And then the Falcons inexplicably took Michael Penix Jr., great quarterback from Washington, took him to the national championship game. Play lost to Michigan. They just signed Kirk Cousins for like $180 million over 4 years, and 100 of that's guaranteed. So even if they somehow get rid of Kirk Cousins sooner than they expected, he's going to be okay. But just odd that you would invest all that much in a quarterback and then take a quarterback to not be your starter in the top 10. Very weird.
It was weird, unless they, Cousins has gotten, had a big injury last year. Maybe got some nervousness there. And apparently Cousins was not told until the pick was like almost ready to be made, which kind of, probably has his nose out of joint. He'll probably miss 4 to 6 weeks with his nose out of joint. But the other thing, my favorite was people saying, oh, how's he going to react to that? And somebody posted a GIF of Woody Harrelson from some movie, I don't know which one, taking piles of money and dabbing his tears with, giant wads of cash. So he'll just have to sleep on his giant pile of money and cry himself to sleep every night.
Anyway, Jim, welcome home. Have a good weekend. Talk to you on Monday.
Talk to you Monday, Greg.
Jim Garrity, National Review. I'm Greg Corombos of Radio America. Thanks so much for being with us today. Do subscribe to our podcast if you don't already, and tell your friends about us as well. Thanks also for your 5-star ratings and your kind reviews. Please keep those coming. Get us on your home devices. All you have to say is play 3 Martini Lunch Podcast. Follow us on X. He's at Jim Garrity. I'm at Dateline_DC. Have a terrific weekend, and please do join us on Monday for the next 3 Martini Lunch.